Welcome back. Let's take a look at new CCIE tracks starting from the April 27th, 2020. As we all know, as a part of major restructure of CCIE program, last year Cisco announced changes to the existing tracks and announced some new CCIE tracks. So let's take a look. Changes are announced for the following 6 tracks: CCIE Enterprise Infrastructure, CCIE Datacenter, CCIE Security, CCIE Service Provider, Collaboration, and Enterprise Wireless. In the exam format, there are major changes. There are going to be only 2 sections now. First of all, section 1, where we're going to ask to design the network, is 3 hours long, and there is no more diag section there, guys. So that's the good news. So we're going to be expecting to create, analyze, and validate design in the first part of the lab. In the second section, it's famous config section, where we're going to look to configure our design in that section. And finally, there's no new news that the devices are similarly virtual and physical, and there's some web-based elements in them. First track is CCIE Enterprise Infrastructure. This track replaces CCIE Routing and Switching, and it's starting from April 27th. Now, the main thing is the changes. So if we look at the percentage changes in terms of technology, we have in the version 5, you see that the layer 2 and layer 3 technologies, they take a huge part in the exam. And then we've got some VPN, infrastructure, security, and services, 15% each. But in the new version, we see that the infrastructure is combined into one section, and it's just 30%. So instead of a huge 60, and then we see a big section of SDN, and that's the more important change that's happening in all tracks along the way. If you see transport technologies and solutions, the new section been added, and infrastructure security remains the same, 15%. And finally, again, the big change is in the infrastructure and automation programmability. We see that already in the first track, there's a major shift towards software-defined networking and programming. Next is CCIE Datacenter version 3, and is starting on 27th of April, along with other tracks. As we all know, it's an 8 hours long practical exam where we will be asked to plan, design, deploy. This is the design part, and optimize, and finally program the network. And if you notice, the automation is mentioned already in the summary. Let's take a look what's changed. In the version 2.1, we have layer 2 and 3 technologies, 28%, and data center services 17%. Storage and networking and compute 20%. Automation 10% of the exam. And fabric infrastructure a huge 25%. So let's move over and take a look what's changed. You see the layer 2, layer 3 technologies this time are 20% only, so there's 8% been reduced. Fabric infrastructure is 15%. So that's also 10% reduction in there. And there's a new section of fabric connectivity, and that takes 15%. Compute is 15%. And slightly modify module of data center storage protocols and features of 15%. Data center security has been increased, and that's 10%. And finally, automation, and that's 15%. So it's a huge change in terms of automation and programming. Next, we're going to take a look at CCIE Security version 6. It's starting on April 27th. In terms of format, there's no change. And it's starting with same 8 hours long lab exam where we have to design, deploy, and then finally configure, and automation has been added as expected. Let's take a look at the changes happened between the two versions. In version 5, we have security and intrusion prevention, and that's a huge 23%. Next is advanced threat protection and content security, 19%. Secured connectivity, segmentation, 19% again. Identity management, information exchange, and access control, big 24%. And finally, infrastructure security, virtualization, and automation combined, 15%. So let's take a look what's changed in the new version. We see that parameter security and intrusion prevention remains the same, from 20 to 19% difference. Secure connectivity and segmentation, again almost same. That was 19% and now it's 20%. Infrastructure security is 15%, a separate section now. Identity management, information exchange, and access control, a huge 25% section. And finally, advanced threat protection and content security is 25% in the 24 in the previous section, and now it's 20%. Next, let's check version 5 of service providers exam, and it's starting on April 27th, and the lab format remains the same, 8 hours long lab. And we have again the design, the planning and implementation part, that is config, and we're going to be asked to configure dual stack IPv4 and IPv6, and automation, of course. That's first time in SP exam. Let's take a look at the difference between the blueprint in the two versions. So currently we are in CCIE Service Providers version 4.1, and new one is going to be 5. Core routing is 30% and it's going to be reduced to 25%. The service providers architecture 22%, and that will be increased in along with the services at 25%. Access and aggregation was 21%, and now it's called access connectivity, and that's been reduced to 10%. The high availability and fast conversion remains same topic, but as you see, 10% is reduced in the new exam. In the old exam, version 4.1, we had security, operation and management, 12%, and here we have security been separated in 10%, and huge assurance and automation section of 20% for CCIE service providers. So guys, get ready to learn Python again. Next one is CCIE Collaboration version 3. Start date is similar to others, 27th of April. It's the same again, lab is 8 hours, and it's divided into 2 modules, which is a new format really. I've just explained it in slightly different format in this slide. Is module 1 is 3 hours design module, and module 2 is deploy, operate and optimize, means it's a config part. Let's now take a look at the changes that have happened in this version. So in the version 2, we had the protocol and API at 12%, and that's been reduced to 10%. Infrastructure and quality of service was 11%, and that's almost same, just 1% reduction in that section. Call control dial plan was 24%, and that's been reduced to 20% in the new version. Endpoints, user management and mobility was 10%, and it's been kept the same. Edge services were 18% in the old one, and new version it's been increased 2%. Media resources, meetings and call recording was 12% of the exam in the version 2. In the new version, it's been increased to 15%. Collaboration applications was 13% in new one, and that's been increased as well, along with a new section of services. And that's 15% of the exam now in version 3. And finally, CCIE Enterprise Wireless. This is version 1 of the new CCIE Wireless. Exam starts on 27th of April. And in Enterprise Wireless version 1, we have same format of 8 hours lab. First of all, design part and then the config section. Let's now compare the changes between the two versions. CCIE Wireless version 3.1. The first section was configure and troubleshoot the network infrastructure, and that was 15% of the blueprint. Next one was configure and troubleshoot an autonomous deployment model, and that was 12%. Third was the configure and troubleshoot AROS application, virtual mobility and XPEX controllers, 27%. Configure and troubleshoot wireless security, identity management and ICE, 17%. And then looking at the infrastructure, MSC and CMX, and that was a decent portion, 15% of the blueprint. And finally, configure and troubleshoot WLAN, media and applications, services, 14% of the blueprint. And now there's huge changes in the new Enterprise Wireless version 1, and rightly so. The radio frequency standards is one of the big things, and I think that's the very positive entry into the exam and very useful. And then Enterprise Wireless Networks, basically a lot of emphasis on Enterprise Wireless, and that's a huge 25% increase and very practical entry from Cisco here. Wireless security and identity management is increased 20%. That is also a very useful topic. Wireless business applications and services, and that's increased to 20%. And finally, like other tracks, automation has 10% in CCIE Wireless as well. Thank you. If you like the video, please subscribe to the channel and give your comments below.